Are you seeking the call?
Mr. Chair.
Carol Beaumont.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I rise to speak on Part 4 of the Legal Services Bill and just note in relation to this bill in total that we have supported it to date, but Labor is keeping our support under review for the bill. And in relation to Part 4, as you say, a very narrow provision, transitional and savings provisions, amendments to other enactments and repeals. Now, this part, of course, has 5 subparts, and those subparts relate, first of all, to transitional arrangements for transfer of legal services agency to the Ministry of Justice, and we have raised concerns about potential issues of independence there. There is also in subpart 2, we see the transition of matters commenced, approvals granted and funding provided under the former Act. Subpart 3, transition of matters commenced under the Legal Services Act 1991. Subpart 4, amendments to other enactments, and Subpart 5, repeal and revocation. Now, one of the transitional arrangements under Subpart 4 is that employees of the agency, that's the Legal Services Agency, will be transferred to the Ministry of Justice unless they do not consent. So that's very important in these times of high unemployment. It is, of course, very important that people have employment security. So I'm certainly supportive of that provision. We've got 158,000 New Zealanders out of work at the moment, so at least the people in the Legal Services Agency have the option of transferring to the Ministry of Justice, and that transfer will see their terms and conditions of employment no less favourable than what they currently have. So let me put on record that in these tough economic times of high unemployment, that is an important transitional provision. It does also make me want to ask the Minister a couple of questions, and this is more to do with non-legislative changes, but in terms of the transition from one system to the other, there's been a number of announcements made in conjunction with this bill which I think do affect the transition. And first of all, I suppose there is the decision around expanding the public defence service to Hamilton, Wellington and Christchurch that my colleague Carmel Sepuloni referred to, and indeed also the working with community law centres to develop uniform sets of standards. And I'm just wondering what the transitional provisions will look like and whether there will be continuation of this given the Minister's departure from his role. I mean, he's made a number of undertakings and a number of announcements in relation to this bill, so I'm seeking from the Minister his commitment that those transitional provisions around his departure will continue on. The other thing is, of course, the funding gap that my colleague Charles Chauvel mentioned when he was speaking on Part 3, and that's a funding gap of $400 million, I understand. And so, again, I ask what the transitional arrangements may look like in relation to some of these non-legislative changes, like the expansion of the public defence service to Hamilton, Wellington and Christchurch, given that $400 million funding gap, and of course the fact that we know that the budget the government will be announcing this May is likely to see cuts in public services across the board, and many important core services that assist New Zealanders, like working for families, will be under threat. So can I just go back to the transitional arrangement, Mr. Chair, that is alluded to in Part 4, and just check with the Minister about what the certainty is that these other announcements that have been made by the Minister in relation to changes like the expansion of the public defence service, will they be able to be honoured by this government in light of that funding gap of $400 million and, in fact, the reality of cuts that we are all anticipating in public services. So I think they're fairly important transitional arrangements too. I acknowledge that they are non-legislative matters, but there is, I think, the importance of the fact that those announcements have been made in conjunction with the Legal Services Bill, and I would ask the Minister for his comment on those matters.
Charles Chauvel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I